Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. For those of you who have not listened to this podcast before, let me tell you a little bit about the show. As you think about the evolution of data, compute, storage systems over the last several decades, data has become increasingly decentralized. It's moved out of mainframes into open systems. Now, lots of organizations have multiple data centers, probably multiple clouds, multiple cloud regions, and data is being created all over the place at the edge, sensors, IoT, devices, that type of thing. And so Data Unchained digs into both the challenges of utilizing this data as a valuable resource within your enterprise, securing it, knowing what you have, and really making it an asset that's available to you as an organization. So we'll be digging in today's episode both the challenges as well as the opportunity for these decentralized data sets. Joining me today is Collin Graves. Collin is the founder and CEO of North Labs. Collin, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Molly. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you. What makes Collin tick?
Yeah, so I've been in the cloud space since the early days of AWS. I got started in 2007, so I think we're going on about 17 years now. Learned about it while I was in the military, where I was not in IT or anything data related. I was turning wrenches on aircraft and flying around with special operations and NATO response forces all over Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. But I learned about AWS from my dad, which if you knew him, you would find that very ironic. This is a guy who just got his first smartphone, still likes to navigate with a King's Atlas, somebody who's very much a late adopter as far as technology goes, but he sent me an article about it in 2007. I remember walking to a plane in the freezing winter of Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota and read about how Amazon was, making the cloud a thing. And I thought to myself, okay, I need to be a part of this. And here we are. So
funny analogies. My dad, he actually was on this show related to some of his rocket science work that he's done. But he worked at Martin Marietta, and back in the day, they were talking about internet before internet was a thing. So the very similar analog that they had to connect government data centers together. They did it in a secure way. It wasn't with the internet, but that's what it ultimately became over time. And he was talking about, this is amazing. We can have two computer systems in two places talk to each other. And it, eventually evolved. So kind of a fun analog. That's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. So other than that, I've got a small family. There's an 11-week-old on board with us now, so apologies for the bags under my eyes. But other than that, yeah, for sure. But other than that, love to golf. I play golf competitively. I race cars competitively, and I was a competitive shooting athlete in the military as well. So lots of competitive
hobbies and interests
aspects in my life for sure.
So you founded a company, North Labs. What problem were you looking to solve when you went out and decided to found a new company?
Yeah, so when I first got started with AWS, I actually founded another company prior. So I ran a group called Cloud CTO from 2010 through 2014. So I started it while I was in the military, while I was flying around to all sorts of, foreign locations all over the world. And what we did was, everybody's familiar with Dropbox.
Sure.
We basically built Dropbox before Dropbox for construction companies that needed to share large files in the field over 2G or 3G cellular. So very very niche sort of market, and I exited from that company in 2014 very modestly. It was not anything crazy. signed my life away with a 2-year non-compete. So I helped groups out in mostly the Bay Area with their cloud strategy and transformation efforts, popular transportation startups, popular cell phone gaming startups, that sort of thing. And when I founded North Labs in 2016, I didn't immediately know I wanted to go back into the cloud service provider space. I actually started North Labs to be a startup incubator, right? I had gotten a lot of great product management and product strategy experience in the Bay Area and figured, okay, if I can pair that with the cloud and sort of micro investments, maybe this could become a thing. That lasted about 9 months before I realized, like, okay, really where I want to be is in this evolving landscape of the cloud. It was so different in those 2 years since I had exited from cloud CTO, and it was really becoming popular as opposed to back in 2010, you might imagine. I got chased out of plenty of boardrooms with pitchforks and torches, right? Because it was a foreign concept and not comfortable. But
Yeah,
in
not trusted.
2016,
Yeah, all
yeah,
kinds of
exactly. But in
issues. Yeah.
2016, like it was, I think we were beginning to realize that it was the future, and I knew that I could take my understanding of the cloud and my tenure in it to help organizations really build out their maturity.
So what does North Labs do?
Yeah, so we are a data strategy, implementation, and managed services company, and we mostly help manufacturing and industrial organizations build out their sort of next level data maturity.
Okay.
We work very closely with AWS, as you might imagine. We're one of just a small handful of partners in their global ecosystem that are focused on manufacturing and industrial, because it's a very different beast than selling into financial services or healthcare or another industry vertical. So we have a very tight relationship with AWS, mostly working to help their customers on that journey of building out more proper data capabilities for the new age of connected factories, AI, ML, data analytics, that sort of thing.
That's super cool. And definitely, like you say, each of these vertical markets, there's some overlap in the types of technologies and infrastructure they need, but how they're using it for what, where it's generated can really be quite different. Can you talk a little bit about the data? What are the data sets when you're thinking about these industries specifically? Is it coming from factories? Is it coming from autonomous driving? What are the data sets? Let's just start there.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, whenever you think about manufacturing, whether that's sort of discrete manufacturing, right? We have raw materials that get turned into a widget. Or you think about more industrial groups like oil and gas, energy utility, aerospace, that sort of thing. Really, where we're focused is on the convergence between IT systems, so information technology systems, and OT systems, operational technology systems. So for those not familiar, IT is what you typically think it is. It might be your CRM, it might be your ERP, anything related to that aspect of the business. The OT side is really where the soup is made. You're talking about MES systems, so manufacturing execution systems, SCADA systems, program level type of sensors and cameras and RFID tags and stuff like that. There's historically been a huge divide between IT and OT because you wouldn't want someone to hack into your email server and be able to take down your production, right? So historically, those two concentration areas have lived in two very different silos within these organizations. But now the evidence is clear that being able to combine insights from those systems allows organizations to move faster with more precision and make better decisions that ultimately drive growth within the organization. So that's typically where we're seeing a lot of interest from our customers.
Okay, that makes sense. And you brought up the word that's hard to have any conversation without bringing up, but AI, ML, deep learning. Is this changing a lot of how people in these organizations are wanting to put their data to work, or is it just kind of a peripheral another application that you're feeding data to? How significant is it? How is it changing workloads?
Yeah, so obviously there are different degrees of how one can leverage AI, anywhere from neural networks and deep learning, like you mentioned. But the one that's really becoming topic du jour within these organizations is how do we leverage generative AI to help boost our workflows, right? So now the caveat for Gen AI is that sure, it's easy to get started. I just log into ChatGPT and play around with some stuff. But as it relates to actually building a useful capability within the organization, you need to still have that foundation of the house poured, right? I use the home building analogy a ton. It's one that people generally understand. If Gen AI is that sort of upstairs game room that everyone's really excited to have built out, you still need to have the concrete poured and the rebar laid so you can sustain the structure you're building on. So we are typically approaching Gen AI from a very small bite of the elephant perspective, while we're also laying that concrete and that rebar with proper data foundations, right? Unifying data, preparing data for analysis from these various systems, and then allowing generative AI to tap into that data. So, but I would say the most common use case we're seeing with our customers is historical document processing and being able to also tap into your historical Excel spreadsheets, right? The vast majority of industrial organizations still run their data management almost entirely on Excel. So being able to pair that Excel flavor with historical document flavor and open up Gen AI really allows our customers to sort of see what we call the art of the possible and have those light bulbs go off in terms of where else in the business AI might be able to help create efficiencies.
So you're using AI to parse through old stuff to find nuggets of insights or valuable information that might help a project that's happening 10 years later, that kind of thing.
Exactly. When you think about industrial orgs, a lot of them have been around for a very long time. A lot of them have grown via mergers and acquisitions. And so there's a lot of tribal knowledge that's kept in those historical documents. And really, there's never been a way to leverage that information aside from Molly digging in and having to read through 1,000 different documents and glean insights on her own. Now the idea is if we can read through these 1,000 documents in 20 seconds and inquire as to what was in them or use them to create new documents, now we're introducing an aspect of efficiency that these businesses have never seen. And it's really exciting to see even more immature executive sponsors or customers who maybe are used to, we're finally getting used to ERPs for the first time, right? Go, oh my gosh, if I just applied this over here, I would really be able to eliminate a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting that has to go on within my organization on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and free up those human beings time to have meaningful conversations, to drive change and process optimization, to actually do meaningful ROI producing work and not get stuck in the menial activities that a lot of people find themselves in for their day jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting. In other parts of the conversations I'm involved with in data architectures for AI and whatnot, one of the things or themes that seems to be clear is IT and infrastructure systems that were historically designed for human beings to interact with them. You know, human beings were using the data, human beings were managing them. There's now this world of machines, so, you know, GPUs probably, that you're interacting with. And it just takes a different type of infrastructure. But like you say, it frees up humans to do things machines can't do. And there's this fear, right, of my job's going away. And maybe the boring aspects of your job might go away. The, shuffling copies of data around or reading records, that kind of thing. But like, I love what you're saying there of it opens up the opportunity to do the human element that maybe you didn't get to do in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a quote in Harvard Business Review, and I'm blanking on who said it. So kudos to whoever said it. And the quote is, AI isn't going to replace humans. Humans who use AI will replace humans who don't. And I
I
think
like
that's
that.
a really apropos statement for where we are, in that Gen AI is not yet in a position to eliminate people. But if it can allow us to drive our efficiencies and actually find more meaningful satisfaction with our jobs, now all of a sudden, you have longer tenures with your employees and lower attrition, and you're able to push the business forward faster, which ultimately I feel any high caliber individual contributor in an organization is looking to do.
For sure.
So we're
For sure.
unlocking those capabilities for them and allowing them to sort of step outside that box they might otherwise feel like they're sitting in on a daily basis.
That makes perfect sense. So, in this whole evolution of how data is being used, who's using it, that type of thing, what's your perspective on the cloud? You've been with the cloud since it got going. There's been lots of back and forth and in and out and ingress and regress and all those things, right? But what is your perspective today on where the cloud is being used, where it's great, where maybe it's not the best thing?
Yeah, well, I say this as probably the most biased person in the room because the cloud is all I know at this point. But I think we're still scratching the surface, to be honest with you. When I think of, back in 2010, 2014, people were saying, are we at peak cloud? And now in 2018, 2020, people are saying, are we at peak cloud? And I just read an article a few months ago that said, are we at peak AI? And I'm going, people, we're obviously not seeing the bigger picture here, because cloud adoption, and the statistics are funky because a lot of the McKinseys and Forresters and Deloittes of the world will say, well, 80% of organizations are using the cloud. Well, that means that they're using Office 365, they're using Google Workspace, they've got Salesforce plugged in. That's fantastic. But I think we're still in a period where we've been adding a lot of SaaS-based tools for a long time, and the tooling sprawl has gotten, in my opinion, out of control. When you think about since 2016, where I think organizations had something like 60 business systems on average in the industrial space, now it's more like 120 or 130. And you can't possibly imagine that all these tools are fully baked with full process in place, with lots of proper change management having, been undertaken. A lot of these, I feel like, are half-baked implementations of various tools. And what I see coming over the horizon is these organizations saying, okay, instead of having 120 tools, I would like to have one service provider who I can use to build my sort of bespoke capabilities for my business, as opposed to being beholden to a bunch of SaaS providers who tell me what I can do with their system and tell me where the limitations are. I think we're now getting into this secondary stage of cloud adoption, which is, how can we be more precise about things? How can we be more calculated? Certainly some workloads might find their way back to on-prem environments. Obviously, if you follow David Hannemeyer Hansen from 37 Signals, he talks a lot about how we went from the cloud back to a data center and we saved all this time and this money. Whether you believe that or not, I think it's a solid data point from an allegorical perspective, but I still think we are in the early stages of cloud adoption. My industry is almost entirely not in the cloud. And we're talking about an industry that produces more data than the government, right? So there's a lot of potential energy within those systems that have yet to be combined and cross-pollinated and had machine learning and AI added to it. So I think AI is really becoming the biggest push for cloud that I've seen since the cloud.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading an article recently from Timothy Prickett Morgan in the Next Platform, and he was summarizing some data that IDC put out late last year on the size of the market for AI. It was infrastructure versus IT related, and
Hmm.
using the word versus is wrong. What he was saying is the IT market right now is about $85 billion according to IDC, and that's all the stuff they include in that. AI is quickly coming up on it and will be about equivalent to it in the next year or two, but it's not taking away from the IT market. There's going to be
Right.
two $85 billion markets. So now all of a sudden, we're talking 170 billion. Not all my IT stuff is shifting to AI. And you can imagine, to your point of what are the opportunities that opens up. It's a kind of myopic conversation of will it be in the cloud or not. Like there's going to be just different ways people are doing things completely, and there's a ton of money being spent in the area to consume it, right?
Yeah.
And I love your comment also about SaaS. I hadn't thought about that, but SaaS was an easy way to consume clouds. That was kind of like the easy button. Somebody did it for you, put together the underlying bits, and a lot of organizations jumped on that. Are you kind of thinking that now that there's more expertise around how to use cloud and hybrid cloud, maybe SaaS is less necessary, at least to get access to the value of cloud, that just those skill sets have been being built up? Or were you going a different direction with that?
No, I think you're spot on. I still think we're a ways out from that. Folks like you and I sit on the forefront of this conversation and pay close attention to it for a living. But as far as market adoption of that philosophy, I think it's going to take some time. And let's face it, there is still a radical shortage of cloud engineers and architects in the market.
Yeah.
A radical shortage, and it's great for organizations like mine, but I'd love to see more college graduates come out of the gates with extensive cloud expertise as opposed to what I learned in my undergrad, which was how to handwrite Python code and this is how a database works. I think we should be starting people with here's AWS, here's how this works, or Google or Microsoft, doesn't matter. Here's how we're building with greater efficiency, because ultimately that's what employers are looking for, and that's where the talent shortage is. So I think it'll take some time, but I certainly don't think, if you think about SaaS, the SaaS explosion for an average organization, what's the magic number? We've gone from 40 or 50 to 120, 130. What's the magic number? 200, 250?
Yeah, exactly.
It can't possibly continue down that path and be a net positive investment for these organizations. And at least from my small sliver of the world, we're seeing these organizations go, this is crazy. Our entire Q4 is spent renewing SaaS licenses that we're not sure we need because it handles this 1% of something. Can't we just build that and pay for it as we need it, as opposed to having to have all these seats and licenses and limitations that come with SaaS? So it'll come, but I don't think we're there yet. It'll be fun to pay attention to how that philosophy shifts in the market over the next couple of years.
It's also interesting to think beyond what you were talking about licensing and different slivers of types of data. It also creates a whole bunch of data silos. We've had data engineers, data scientists, as well as companies who have created businesses out of aggregating those data silos out of SaaS tools. So it's created a market as well as a problem. And you think about this idea of data architecture. If you kind of take out the tooling of what you're doing with the data, but you're architecting your data and want to give access to those data sets to other things outside of that SaaS tool, how do you do that, right? And that's an interesting challenge as well. And as we think about data architecture, which you and I are just about to talk about, that's a challenge too. If you have all these SaaS tools, now you have 120 isolated data sets, but you want to pull knowledge from them for something else. That's hard too, right?
Yeah, and that's that foundational work that I talked about earlier, pouring the concrete of the house, is really that, because you have so many systems that have different data models, the data is accessed differently, it's refreshed differently. There are different laws of physics applied to each of these data sources, right? It's not like you're pulling a green widget out of Salesforce and a green widget out of NetSuite. You have to make them, you have to turn them both into green widgets because one's yellow and one's red.
Exactly.
So that becomes a fundamental prerequisite for these organizations to do anything beyond just inquiring into one system at a time. But asking one system at a time, what's true of the world is only going to give you the perspective of that one tool, and it may not be the full picture that's necessary to make proper business decisions. And that's what I think slows a lot of organizations down, actually. We brag about all these insights generated in individual systems, but it only takes one person within the organization to go, that doesn't match with my understanding in this system over here.
Trust
the whole
is broken.
Thing to start crumbling,
right.
And if you don't trust your data, you said the key word. If you don't trust your data, you have nothing. It takes a long time to build that trust, and it's very quickly eroded. And that's why I think data programs fail at such an alarming rate, 87%, according to McKinsey, right? Is because trust isn't established. And that's because we're not allowing this data to all subscribe to the same laws of physics and answer a truly meaningful question with meaningful data. So people stop using the systems and they stop asking the questions, and that's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. So data architectures, if you think about, let's focus on manufacturing. You said they haven't even really full blown gotten up into the cloud for any number of reasons, but let's just focus on that industry to kind of keep the conversation focused in one area. How are you approaching their data architecture discussions today? When you go in and an organization saying, okay, I want to bring someone in to help me to make sure I'm ready for this next big data cycle that's occurring with AI and whatnot. Is it a complete rewrite? Do you kind of have a process you work them through to figure out their bespoke architecture? How do you approach that with these groups?
Yeah, we start everything with as small a bite of the elephant as possible, right? My whole philosophy is if you light a match and hold it to the ocean, nothing happens, right? The match goes out. You can't boil the ocean. And so for us, it's about starting with more of a strategy conversation, because typically when you think about, and no slight to these customers, but typically less mature in this space, right? Maybe they're more sophisticated on the automated sort of production side, but when it comes to the actual data world they want to create, there are a lot of gaps. And so our first approach is to help them fill in a lot of those gaps. Right? What do we want to unify and why? Why do we care that we're doing this in the first place? What is it going to do for the business when we're able to actually create clarity with our data? Where do we have outsized upside to be able to leverage automation and better insights and machine learning, et cetera, to help us fulfill work orders faster, get things out the door faster to our customers so they're happier? There's typically quite a few of those gaps to fill. And then the last piece is, as I'm sure you've run into in other conversations, everyone and their grandma comes to us with, oh, we want real-time insights. I want to see exactly what's happening within my business at every moment in time. Okay, we can do that. But there's quite a bit more responsibility involved, and there's a lot more cost that comes with it. What is actually reasonable from an updated data insights perspective for this organization? Does it need to be real time in that it's under a second or under 300 milliseconds? Or is 5 minutes okay? Because that's a big difference. Is 1 hour okay? And typically we see people go, you know what, now that I think about it, I check our systems. I'd like to check my system once when I sit down in the day and then once after lunch. And then maybe another time after the workday wraps. Okay, so now we're talking about something completely different and slightly more trivial than having to create a real-time engine underneath the surface. And then the last piece is just identifying what are those priority systems that are going to, it's the Pareto principle. What 20% of our systems can provide us 80% of the value that we're seeking? Because it's not going to be all 120 of those systems that you and I talked about. It might be 6, 8, 10 that really generate the vast majority of truth within the business. And so on the business side, it's obviously your ERP, it's obviously your CRM, right? Any of your financial tools, marketing tools, etc. And then on the OT side, the production side, you're talking MES, you're talking your historian database, right? So snapshots of sensors and pressures and vibrations. And typically starting there is a really good place to focus, and allows us to make sure we're being really precise with our initial efforts, so we don't, my whole thing is I want to create a vending machine of ROI for my customers. You put $1 in, you get $2 out. You're going to do that all day long.
But like you say, in increments, not one big project that might fail 4 years in and you never get anything out, right?
That's just it. Is we have an internal measurement at North Labs, a KPI called initial time to value, which is really when's the first time you see Molly's eyes go, oh my gosh, I get it, right? And our whole target is if we can get our executive sponsor to go wide-eyed within the first 45 days of engaging with us, the likelihood that they become a multi-year, long-term, high-dollar subscriber to us, customer for us, is like 70% higher. So what's that thing that we can unlock in the first 45 days where they go, I see. Okay, it was a bit unclear. There were some rough edges. Now I understand how this narrative is woven. Okay, let's go apply it over here and over here and over here. So that's exceptionally important for any service provider, I think, is if you boil the ocean for 2 years, people are going to go, all I've done is spend money and I see nothing. So starting small is key.
Makes sense. And as you think about, we talked about the data architecture, the models or the applications consuming the data, how do you advise? Do your customers pretty much know these are the tools that are going to be using the data, or are they investigating that as part of this process as well?
Yeah, we help them identify that. So obviously, with us being so focused on the AWS Alliance, it helps us really narrow in on those tooling decisions. And the whole thing that I say to customers is the way we're architecting the system, if you have a true unified data model and you're worried about what BI tools or data applications you're going to use, the good news is you can use any tool you want because we have a unified model that lives in our warehouse, that lives, that's accessible by our data lake. So you can plug different tools and applications into it and still have it speak the same language. But having that narrower aperture with AWS really limits a lot of the what about, because speaking as a former software engineer, right? It's very easy to get stuck in a perpetual cycle of tire kicking and vendor comparison and evaluation. And the fact of the matter is, if you think about this 87% failure rate within data programs, most of those are data programs that died on the vine with best of breed tools in place. And yet, there are still radically successful data programs out there today that are using tools that we might consider prehistoric. And so it's not the tooling aspect of what it means to create proper data maturity is probably the least important variable in that multivariate expression. It's how do we get people to establish confidence in what we're doing and trust our data, and how do we establish proper process to ensure that we're able to keep this maturity growing and these capabilities growing over time. So that's where we also spend a ton of time with customers, because in my mind, that's where groups like mine typically underserve customers, but I think it's the most important aspect of data program success ultimately.
And are you seeing an accelerated urgency in this area? Are you getting more inquiries? It's hard sometimes for us, like you say, we live in the world of what's the next big thing and read all the HBRs and, IDCs and stuff. But from a customer perspective, has the urgency changed in the last year or two, do you feel?
It has. And I wouldn't even say certainly in the last year, but especially in the last 6 months, if I'm being honest.
That's how it feels to me too, for sure.
Yeah, I think we're finally over that first that first hump of the hype cycle where people go like, yeah, it just gives you regurgitated answers, but I have Google for that, right? It gives you data quality about as good as Ask Jeeves did back in the day. But now we're through this hump where people are seeing real world examples, and they're talking about it within their executive forums or their advisory boards. Their mentors are talking about it, their employees are talking about it, and so there's a little bit more urgency. And there are stages to any new technology, right? You start life sort of very cautious and in disbelief. Then you become a little warmer to it and maybe want to kick the tires. Slightly warmer still, you want to implement proofs of concept. And now you're red hot and it's going, you're saying, how can I implement this into my SOPs? So we're definitely, I think, we're still in that cautionary phase, but there are a lot more people in that cautionary phase than there were even a year and a half ago. But I haven't seen a pull like this, like I said, since early cloud days when people went, ooh, I just want everything to live in the cloud.
Right.
Now the idea is, I don't know the first thing about Gen AI. I don't know the first thing about how it can help my business, but I know I want to learn about it. And that's become a really fun conversation with customers.
Very cool. So as we wrap things up, I wanted to mention a few things. Really interesting conversation, and I suspect followers of our show, some may be in AWS, some may be in manufacturing, but a lot of them are in other areas. Is North Labs a company they can work with to help them kind of outside those areas? I know you have to have a specialization in AWS, but maybe just talk about which types of customers you talk to and work with.
And we certainly have our teeth have been cut in the world of manufacturing and industrial, but we have customers in high tech, we have customers in pharma, we have customers in healthcare, life sciences, that sort of thing, financial services. So as long as there's an appetite to adopt better data capabilities within an organization, we'll talk with anyone. It's just really more about, typically we work with organizations at least, 10 million in size, 25 million in size and on up. But, even if organizations are smaller than that, they're still looking to formulate that strategy, right? And more than anything, we want to be seen as a mentor to a lot of organizations in the market, an advisor, and happy to have a conversation with anyone. I love talking about this stuff, and frankly, it's all I know at this point. It's been 17 years of this. I can't talk about anything else without looking like a total buffoon. So,
unless it's car racing and golfing.
Well, unless it's car racing and golfing, right? Exactly. We could talk about that too, but thankfully, I hitched my cart to a horse like AWS and have been able to sort of ride the adoption of that. I could have hitched it to something else and not have been in this position, but always happy to have a conversation. I'm most easily reached on LinkedIn. I don't have any other social media, so LinkedIn is the place to be.
Collin Graves, North Labs,
Collin
right?
Graves is my
I found you pretty easily. So, yep. And then we were going to link something about a blueprint offering, which you all have, to the show notes. Can you tell folks a little more what that is, and so that if their interest is piqued, they know what they're getting if they go check that link out?
Yeah, so that assessment you and I talked about earlier, where we typically start with customers, we actually give away. Sometimes we get a little bit of subsidy from Amazon to be able to conduct these assessments, but it's meant to be at no cost to customers. It's a 4-week interactive engagement where we're really going through the current state of affairs within the business, what the future state could look like, and then we deliver a blueprint, similar to that house analogy, of what we can do over the next 6, 12, 18, and 24 months to help us drive this vision forward. And customers are free to take that and use it internally, hire one of our competitors, why would you, or work with us on collaboration. So that can be found at buildmydatablueprint.com, or if you reach out on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I'm interested in this, that gives us an opportunity, obviously, to connect one-on-one and start the conversation that way. So I always prefer that versus lead magnets. So just reach on out on LinkedIn and we'll talk about it.
There you go, using machines to get the information out there, but actually want to have the human conversation. You got to do the fun
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yep.
Hey, Collin, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining the show. Really valuable tidbits, I think, throughout. And I think pointing folks to North Labs as they're trying to figure out their next step in their journey, wherever it is. They may be early, they may have few misstarts, whatever it is, or even later stage, because there's so much evolution and innovation occurring is great. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed it, Molly.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.